Visuals that might offend sensitive viewers. Parental guidance is advised.
What are you doing here, killing our people?
The world doesn't want to imagine a woman that is just militant. A woman won't tell me anything. Where does that come from? Women must do what women want to do.
How do you switch from a boy to a man at the house?
I can accept who you are and suspect a call, but you are not going to disrespect me in this house.
You're not able to stand up to the white man in the workplace.
Women live in fear.
Lisa Vetten, I'm a researcher specialising in gender-based violence based at Wits University.
Which part of me do you want to introduce? I am Nyuko Labohang Shikwambani. I am an African radical feminist, and I am a media producer and a content producer.
Can you start again? Mauti, who I am, what does that mean?
My name is Lebogang Ramafoko, and I am a feminist and a CEO of the Soul City Institute for Social Justice for Young Women and Girls. I'm Funzani Mtembu, so I write about feminist economy and Pan-Africanism and social movements. I'm also an activist.
Well, my name is Mbuyiselo Puota. I have worked with men and boys for many, many years, focusing on how do we become better men, how do we stop violence against women and children, and men as well.
My name is Twana Ndlapo. I'm a CEO of the Shaville Foundation.
No, I still have the energy, but like introduction is so weird. Weird.
We are speaking about a human being when we speak about a woman. We are speaking about a person that defines themselves as a woman. But key for me is that a woman is a human being, because I think the society we live in sometimes forgets that. When I think about women, I think about women who are born cisgendered, which means that women who are born with vaginas. But I also think about femininity, womanhood and femininity, and I think about womanhood as feminine and as a form of gender expression. But when I think of women, I also think of women with an X, right? I think of those women who are not born cisgendered women, which means women who are not born biologically female.
It is a gender that I've been classified under in a world that has two genders, which is a male and a female. And I come after a long line of very powerful women who have done great things.
A woman is what they tell you they are. If a woman wants to nurture, let them nurture. If a woman does not want children, let them not have children. If a woman wants to be a pilot or wants to be a gangster or wants to be a nurse or wants to stay at home, let them be who they want to be. However, gender is a social construct.
I think if you look at history, you'll see that being a woman has meant different things at different times. It's also a question that's very cultural. In different societies, there are different standards around what women are. But you can also see it in law, for instance, when it does recognize, for example, when it's been used to exclude women. It will identify them as women, specifically in order to exclude them from taking on particular kinds of jobs. So I think the question of what a woman is very much one that's shaped by your history, your politics, and your culture at any particular time in a society.
I see inclusion not being there as a country. People take decisions for other people within our country, and then a sense of entitlement where people just think they can throw anything to communities.
So the conversation around women with an X was essentially about how do we ensure that when we include trans women into the word women. The whole reason for that to have happened in that way was to be inclusive.
Sex is the biological, male or female. That's what sex is about. But then gender is what we call social construction, where a society says that men can clean, men can wash dishes, and women can drive, women can do what is considered manual work. So it's how society constructs. It gives us, it puts us rather into these boxes. That's what one would call a gender socialization.
We have assumed certain roles as people that have got nothing to do with biology, but that have got everything to do with the way societies have organized themselves. So we've got different notions that we sometimes, and maybe often, too often for that matter, do not even question around why do we think that to be a man is to do this and to be a woman is to do this?
Do I think that women would be able to define themselves, you know, outside of patriarchy, if patriarchy wasn't there, it didn't exist? I think I'd like to believe in a world where those pressures, the pressure to define oneself based on what their body looks like biologically, didn't matter. We need to respect autonomy of the human spirit and its evolutionary process, and allow people to evolve what their genders are meant to be or are not meant to be, and for people to have a choice.
Come, let's go. I want to see what you've got underneath those expensive jeans of yours.
How do you know I've got anything on?
You're a bloody marvelous woman, Cheryl.
How society views women would be their sexual objects, and just objectifying them as well, and like just boxing them into that position of these beings that are objects that exist to sort of satisfy men, or, you know, like make men happy.
It's how we were raised. We are not born into these roles. I mean, there are countries where these roles would be different that you would find, especially in the Nordic countries, rather. I mean, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, where you would find that men do the work that we do. I mean, they nurture their babies, they cook, they clean. In fact, there are even timetables. So the difference with us and other parts of the world is that we think that we're born into these roles. Kanti, we're socialized, we were taught, or we were made to believe that these roles are part of our natural orientation, when in fact it's not true.
Those are things that are essentially created by society, right? That this is what a woman is supposed to do: take care of their family, take care of the household, and those kind of things. And so that, in a conventional sense, an ordinary person can actually define a woman as someone who is that. And I could say that women can embody that. There's nothing wrong with being a nurturer and a caregiver and whatnot. But I don't think that we should limit women into that box.
He's Tolengila in the body that I am in. And then when I've got here, women had already had roles that were pre-designed. I believe everybody comes here for a certain mission, each one of us. And so that mission has got to express itself within the rules and the regulations that are preset.
When you speak about biology, you can see how those with power would then use even a misunderstanding of that same biology to then either give power or take that power away. We have seen bodies like this International Athletic Federation wanting to use biology in a very unscientific manner, for that matter, to rule on Caster Semenya. So if you understand that what is happening to Caster Semenya is unjust, because it is, you must then be able to look back and say, hang on, have I not done the same myself with saying, well, you know, a woman won't tell me anything. Where does that come from? Or women must bear children, or women must do this. Women must do what women want to do. People must define themselves if they are women or men or anything in between.
colonization in and of itself is violent, and it's about the abuse of power. And I think what abuses of power introduce into a space or a region is how to abuse power. And of course, Western culture is very phallic, and it centers the male voice, the male penis, the male thought, the male's ability to produce knowledge, the man's divinity and closeness to God in terms of who gets to pray and who gets to lead others in prayers in Western theology. And so when that is introduced forcefully onto a continent and onto people like ourselves, it can only introduce how to abuse power.
What did he want, this? Huh? Does he want to meet with you somewhere? Does he want to get into your panties, or have you let him do that already, eh? Stop it! Stop it! Don't tell me stop it! Come here!
The difference between then and now is that our patriarchy is in fact accompanied by violence, but the fact that men and women were treated differently, it did not amount to women being looked at as subhuman beings. That's the difference.
This is your husband teaching you a lesson.
Multi-patriarchal, it means umthetho wamadoda and men, you know, everything. We had systems where a woman role was this, and a man role was this, and the children, and everything worked seamlessly. Nothing about it was about to oppress the other. In fact, women played a very advisory role. So even if we cannot be there in battle physically, because when women actually take up arms, then you know this is the last resort. We're not wired like that. Because we give life. And so if you find women in the front line of a battle, then you know what to gubi. And so traditionally then women would be reserved to advise because we can see ahead.
I do know the effects of colonization on how societies grouped themselves, how leadership was assigned, how a lot of the different tribes came about, how even our current gender identities were informed by colonization.
Right? You are patriarchal, you must do this, women must stay there.
In South Africa in particular, we are a country that has been characterized by structural violence, where men would be violated every turn. And there's a school of thought that says that because you're violated in your workplace, you go back in a situation where you feel all powerful, you feel almighty. And as a result, women in that space are the only people who you would look at as being vulnerable or weaker. Then the temptation is you would violate them because then you're not able to stand up to the white man in the workplace.
Ole Nyato, Nikki Westbeck. I can accept who you are at Sebeko Court, but you are not going to disrespect me in this house.
Patriarchy is a system, and much like what supremacy is, patriarchy is everywhere. So patriarchy becomes this omnipresent type of a force that informs every sphere of our being as people.
And you want to ask them, are you talking about pre-colonized Africa, or are you talking about an Africa that happened around colonization with all of its problems? And often people do not go there because, in fact, this social constructs of what makes a man and what makes a woman assign power.
Women occupy a certain space. Now, if we can't do that, we can't self-express, we can't find even the land to do the things that we're supposed to do, you see now that we start jumping to other roles.
African women were always had some sort of a voice, you know, that mattered. And there are aspects of it. I mean, even in our cultures, how things are done, right? You can see that, okay, women are actually being taken seriously in some aspects, right? So I don't think that we can speak about any culture that is immune from colonization.
Master Sulu, along with 20,000 other women, protested against apartheid pass laws and bond to education.
Even before 1956 march to the Union Building, it is amazing that it has been your Charlotte McClock, your Lillian Ngoyi, I mean a whole lot of them that have in fact played a critical role in ensuring that this liberation came into fruition. The difficulty is that the victor's voice would always be prominent. So this is what has happened, that we don't get to hear a lot of, I mean, the positive, the sterling and stunning role that women played in our liberation, because history is written by those who are in charge, in control. And because what patriarchy has always dictated has been that you and I as male, it is our voice who'd be prominent, both in news, in writing, and not because women have not been there, but because he who is in charge of a particular narrative, it is he who would prevail. And this is what has been happening throughout in history.
That day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom.
If we tell the story of women, including well-known ones like Winnie Mandela, and really give them their place rightfully in the history of our own country, we will be doing something that I think patriarchy finds very challenging. We will be dismantling patriarchy. And in fact, any system of power like sexism, any system of power like racism wants to reinvent itself. And one of the ways in which any system of power reinvents itself is that it rewrites history and it airbrushes a number of people.
The world doesn't want to imagine a woman, firstly, that is just militant. No one wants to fathom a woman who has a cause, and a political one, and is militant about that cause, right? Because she can easily be tarnished by, she was a bad mother, she kills children, she didn't care for them. And that's how quickly it is to kill public sentiment.
One woman who basically demonstrates the point very, very well around how patriarchy and sexism is about power is Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela was vilified for her strength as a black woman, as a very strong black woman.
What are you doing here, killing our people? What are you arresting our people for?
Who received and gave punches, or who gave punches as hard as she received them, was vilified by a racist apartheid regime and was vilified by a patriarchal ANC, So we can forgive anybody. We can even forgive right now and have spokespeople within a party that had been accused of rape. They get away, but she became the tarnish.
Even in death, there were people who wanted to refuse and refute her role as Winnie Mandela. But there are also, women such as your Charlotte McClock, your Lillian Ngoyi. We never get to hear. If we get to hear of them, is where a street is named there and there, where we'd have, speeches about them. But as to how they even revolutionized, the ruling party. A lot of them, some of them were soldiers. How they were in the forefront in our liberation. Their stories have not been told.
Mama Winnie, for me, her greatest contribution as one of my African feminist icons is how she deliberately tried to politicize the domestic, right? Where there is a split of men being the rulers of the public domain and women being the rulers of the private domain. While Utata Mandela was incarcerated, and Winnie continued on the ground to rally up support for the release of Nelson Mandela and for the African National Congress.
So the Western notion of telling stories, for an example, is the same way that Hollywood tells it, There was millions of sleeping people until this one person came and, gang, 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 it fits a Western narrative to speak of this individual. And I'm not diminishing just what an important figure he was, but he was one person who would then say he did not do it alone. And historically, he did not do it alone.
But what I loved about what happened in 2018 with the hashtag We Are Nomzamo, hashtag I'm Nomzamo, is that then you had black women now on social media after being punted with all of this information about what they should think of Mama Winnie for years. A first outright refusal, because now we have the means of user-generated content to say, here is one person who was louder, who was more frightening to you because she spoke. And in her grave, we as women collectively are going to refuse that. We're going to refuse to be remembered that way because we are her.
In war, women and children are not part of the battle. Babasitezelwa abantwana, babasitezelwa umfazi, right? You would get to the amabutho okuqala before ngafike ebafazini nabantwana. Asena amabutho abulala thina endlini. So what chances do we have against those that are coming for us if we are the ones that are killing the last guard of our nation?
Shut up and kill her! No,
I think it's highly abnormal. And what makes it abnormal are these acute inequalities. I mean, the level of violence. Look at what's happening in our schools. Look at how a boy would kill a teacher. That's a level of, of abnormality. But you also have young girls who'd beat another girl to a pulp. I mean, these are not what one would call, in a normal society, normal.
You tell me where my son is. Where's my son? Where's my son?
One of the common denominator that sort of speaks to women is the fact that women live in fear in our country. First off, I think that's where it begins, you know. I mean, we are aware of the gender-based violence that's happening in the country and unnecessary violence, I would speak, and it comes in different ways, in different forms, right? Some of the ways that I feel, at the very least, the government can actually help.
Sesaba was express fully on who we are. We don't think the society can take what we are as women. Because somebody might just walk into your own house and decide to chop you up into pieces. We don't own our streets. We can't run or we can't take a walk. Manje, it's winter, 6 o'clock kumnyama. You have to find yourself at home. We can't experience nature. We can't experience the sun because kumele between a particular time and particular time was office in lapho. So it's not fun being a woman.
But as a black woman, I think I live in constant anxiety, more generally. I can't walk anywhere at night without looking over my shoulders for 3 meters. Not even at night, even during the day. You know, I don't have the freedom to just get out the house and walk. Just walk anywhere, freely, especially in Johannesburg.
Every woman knows of entering a building and the security guard is a male. And regardless of anything, they can say whatever they want to you. They can ask you out. They can ask for your number, whether it's a traffic cop, whether it's, you know, we know how our space can be invaded, whether you want it or not, because that's how men behave.
Having been satisfied that the accused admitted the elements of each of the offences, I accordingly found him guilty as charged on the 4 counts.
I had never in that period of April 2017 heard so many women call in on the radio, coming out for the first time about their own rape traumas. And that's what that taxi rape saga allowed women to do. For me was a win, but also some of the most terrifying weeks of my life, I think.
Sandile Mantsui denies that he killed his girlfriend, Karabo Mokoena. Weeks before her death, evidence of an abusive relationship.
So here's a high-flying, middle-class looking couple, and she dies. She's so pretty. and we speak about it in uproar as if it's not happening every day, everywhere, with people with less resources, less beauty. You know, it becomes the one story. It suits our Hollywood narrative of the one story. And yes, it's terrible, and she shouldn't have died, but we must not make it a habit of making these stories as single stories. They are the reality of many, many cases. It was the same with Oscar Pistorius. At the time that his trial was on, there was another family on the other side of the court who were in another courtroom, whose daughter had also been killed by a lover. But, you know, it's Oscar Pistorius. You know, news agents are commercial entities.
I'm still very much perplexed by the Oscar Pistorius case, to a point where I don't know how to feel about it. But I do know that it was a big story on privilege for me, particularly the privilege of the white man. Or the white man can stand in a white man's court and be judged by a black woman, you know, in his own court, and get the kind of sentence that he got.
Our preoccupation with the way women look. So if we look at not just Riva Steenkamp was a very beautiful woman. I think the other example is Karabo Mokoena, also a very beautiful woman. Those two cases both got an enormous amount of coverage. And yet you can look at, I looked at a case recently of a woman who was middle-aged, poor, lived in a shack. Her partner killed her. That got practically no media coverage. Nobody was tweeting about it, it wasn't on Instagram, the media didn't even cover the trial. So I think you find questions of class, race, physical appearance.
Some would argue that, look, the sentence was lenient, I mean, how he was also treated, and then the question is it because he's moneyed? He comes from a well-to-do, opulent, rich family. There's one element that even the judgment, there were a lot of people who, and successfully it was in fact, you know, appealed by NPA, which one must actually in fact congratulate them. So the element of class and the element of race would always be with us.
Class can both make you more vulnerable to violence, and it can also limit what is available to you after violence. When I say it can make you more vulnerable, I mean in the fact that if we look at the way many communities have been designed and structured, the lack of services, the lack of facilities, it will often mean, for instance, that women might be walking to and from public transport at 2 o'clock in the morning in order to get public transport to their work. They may be coming home very late after dark. And that creates opportunities for violence.
Musician Bongeki Lesemelani, known as Babes Wodumo, has not opened a case of assault of Shashua Sin on a video being beaten allegedly by Kwaito star boyfriend Mandla Mapumulo, known as Mampinja.
The Babes Wodumo and Mampinja story, I think for me, it's a good case study of, one, how domestic violence happens, just its nature, but also why it happens, okay? And let me start with why it happens. It happens because we are in a patriarchal society. So when you view people's responses to the abuse, hair going back, we've always said, for as long as I can remember, that in a lot of ways, people who face domestic violence face like a continuum of violence. It starts with emotional and psychological abuse of violence. That makes you feel and believe that you are worthless and that you are who you are because the person you are with has made you who you are.
You may want to condemn Babes and say, but why do you undermine our cause? Why do you go back in that violent, without appreciating what one would call her own agency? We must always, you and I, be mindful that here's a woman who, we must respect her choices. You may not agree with her choices. You also what I call the boys club mentality, where we would say things that other men would want to hear. And when you say this, you suddenly hear others. I mean, a sigh of relief. You see, we told you, awubazi wena abantu besifazane bayahlupha yabona, sibanike ibeijing, sibanike la malungelo, bafunani manje? But because they know that these are things that you and I as males, they sit well with us. Because at the core of it is that we don't want to lose power.
I want us to remember that black men were invited into civilianhood or civil status, right? Into citizen status before the black woman. So when the colonizer arrived and found resources, deep in the soil and wanted to mine, their only use for the black native was labor, right? And whose labor did they prefer? Or whose labor was it natural for them to want to outsource, for lack of a better word, was the black man. When you think about the black woman, their relationship with the colonizer becomes an intimate one, and one that is quite, it's a paradox, right? And you can see remnants of it with domestic workers today, for an example. People that we entrust with our most private and most precious possessions and relationships, right? We trust them with our kids, we trust them with our homes, we trust them with our cars, we trust them with our keys. But when something goes missing, the first person we blame is the domestic, right? And that goes back to, I think, the kind of relationship that the colonizer then formed with the black woman as a result of, or through colonization, is one of a close intimacy.
We do come from a history where our men are boys. Emsebenzini. Mabafike ekhaya abobaba. That is the most twisted scenario ever, because lena uyakhahlelwa. Lena, and you're supposed to, you're not even supposed to, you bear and grin it, you smile when they kick you, when they undermine you, when they tell you are dumb, when they do all of these things that you take from 8 until 5. You bear and grin it. And then you go home. And at this home, you are head of the household. How do you switch from a boy to a man at the house? When you start looking at these images, the religion, they say everybody umlungu lapho. Yet my experience as umlungu, it's somebody who constantly oppresses me, who does not like me, and then the same person is the one that's supposed to be my channel to God. The God that loves me, the God that put me here for a particular reason, and what they say it does not translate to how I'm living.
How patriarchy comes to have its dominance on the African continent and in African society is through the introduction of religion and other theologies from the West. What Christianity in its formulation of divinity does, right, is erase the woman from creation or procreation, right, or from access to divinity. Another thing it does is that it desexualizes the woman. I find terrible issues with all of that because women are sexual, they have a sexuality.
What is extremely sad about religion, or what defines it, is that put a woman in her place. Either be how they worship, or how we are taught as males that, look, women can't stand in front. All of these teachings, I mean, in all religions, you'd find that what is in fact very common about them is that women are good for nothing. But the sad reality is that it is women who are ensuring that these religious groups, organizations, they are sustained and maintained. I mean, the bedrock of any religion are women. But when it comes to meaningful, substantive leadership roles, guess who is in the front? Guess who gets elevated? Amen.
But certainly the kind of populist Christianity we see is one that is problematic. It's problematic in many ways. It's problematic around this prosperity gospel itself. It's problematic in the way that it preys on the vulnerable. But it's also problematic in the way that it does not interrogate even some of the scripts that it says it comes from.
Sidlalwa ngabantu la bezinye izizwe who know their religion very well, who on a Friday, like clockwork, 1912 bayavala idolo. They don't care ukuthi nizile lapha nizothenga nina with your money. They close and go pray. Why is that important? Why do they need to do that? Kuyabasebenzela, you know? But thina usaba ngisho nokubiza umuntu ozokuqinisela umuzi wakho. Because
the findings indicate that many South African women appear to be on the hunt for a relationship with monetary benefits.
Power is informed by money, and money is in the hands of one person. It actually means that it gives one person an upper hand to the other, you know? And so it disadvantages women in those ways, because we know that historically women were concerned with the household and men were concerned with being breadwinners and whatnot. And so I think one of the critiques that I have of our economic policy is the fact that it does not necessarily center Black women in particular in the conversation.
Economical abuse, it's a critical phenomenon in our country, and we have never spoken about it, because then with the one that is in our face, it's violence, because it's so visible. We don't talk sufficient enough about the impact and adverse impact of money in our society, how women are trapped in abusive relationships in the name of, you know, where will I go, what will I do? He is a provider of this family. That is why if we are to create a different South Africa, a South Africa that all of us yearn for, a South Africa which in fact values its women, we would have to talk about a real economic empowerment, and not tiny, not only women who are closer to power, but all women in our country.
One of the ways in which the system sort of disadvantages women is in that way, the fact that we still have to actually negotiate ourselves in the household, but then the bargaining powers are not on our side.
Men are trash has ignited a social media storm. It has split men and women even beyond the boundaries of social media, some would argue. The hashtag came about soon after the grisly discovery of a burnt body of a woman believed to be Karabo Mokoena.
Men are trash speaks about a system, for me, that is trashy. And it's very trashy. And if you want the men are trash hashtag to go away, start confronting the trashiness of the system.
When you say men are trash, the first thing it does, more than it insults and provokes, because the phrase is designed to do that, right? But more than it insults and provokes, it says there is an understanding of an environment or a society or a room or a space. There's an understanding that you lack.
This is a shout out to say no is a no to women. We reject men who abuse our men. We want our kids to feel welcome when they come home. We want to feel free in our own country.
This is a go hashtag men are trash. Now it comes out of a frustration. And you can understand the frustration when you don't know and so we would lash out. Because that's what we know. We're not physically built because we would if we could, you know. And so lashing out then becomes that. And so the hashtag men are trash, and somehow it got their attention because men felt uneasy. But their uneasiness ended to go a point where it says not me, and that's it. How does that help us?
The face of poverty, of landlessness, unemployment, homelessness, of poor health, of abuse is still largely black. It is young and is most likely women.
Feminism, for me, It's an ideology that basically wants to eradicate what I believe is an unjust system.
There's not only one feminism, there are isms. So there are instances where someone would say, look, I want to remain a black feminist, but I also want to remain an African woman. Because for me, feminism is all about where you realize what justice is all about.
The minimum wages for domestic workers that are employed for more than 27 hours per week in the metropolitan areas will be getting R9.63 per hour.
Domestic workers have now just been granted, the right to be covered by the Compensation of Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, which is COIDA, which means that now, as part of their work, they can claim damages from the employees for injuries that happen to them at work.
Women are being placed in positions where their bargaining power can be strengthened, not only in the household but in society. And one of the ways I argued that can happen is perhaps through looking into ensuring that some of the care work, I would say, that women do in the household is sort of done halfway through by infrastructure, in a sense.
The African Football Association has restructured Banyana Banyana's remuneration ahead of their departure for the FIFA Women's World Cup in France. And for the first time, they will earn exactly the same as what Bafana Bafana will earn for their participation at the Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt.
Don't empower us. Give us space to determine. We don't need you to hold our hands. No, don't do that. Give us equal space to self-determine within there and see what we're capable of.
I think women are improving their own lives. They are organizing themselves. They are creating a political language for themselves, whether we're aware of it or not. Efforts of the women's movement might look isolated, but, women are politicizing their domestic. They're politicizing themselves. They're developing a language. We know what it is we want.
1 out of 9 women report rape. So if you take 8 times 40,000, 320,000 women never reported rape. You know why? Because she wore a burqa.
Women's movement for me is just as alive as it was in 1955, was it? When thousands of women marched to union buildings, but there are other ways to organize now, You don't need to be, thousands of you marching to one place. We have the internet, we communicate, we organize in different spaces, seen or unseen. I would watch what Black women in South Africa are doing.
If you want to build a wall, just lay one brick at a time. Lay it as perfectly as possible and lay the next one as perfectly as possible. And you end up with a series of perfectly laid bricks, one on top of the other. And at the end of it, you have a wall, a perfectly built wall. But you didn't start out to say this wall is perfect and so, but every single element that you put there perfectly then builds as part of this bigger picture that you're setting out to do. Family was one such element.
That is why dismantling patriarchy is it's so important, because it's not going to be a magic bullet, one intervention kind of a thing. So right now, I think people must continue to speak out. And I think television shows that continue to put the spotlight on this issue are very critical.
Taking into consideration the demographics of this country and whom the life expectancy of many is reliant on, women are a very fundamental part of building this nation.
Siyazama. Every single day is a battle. Every single day you condition yourself. I will find a way. And if I'll find a way to get to that spot. But it always takes a lot out of you. But also that does not say we don't live in a country where Umeja Mandisa just flew a fighter jet for the first time. So even though Gunzima, there's a glimmer of hope.
for me to say to you that there are certain things that will not be done in our name as men, that you will not use culture, you will not use religion. For us to have a different country, we must have a different mindset with women in our country, that they can't forever be considered as second-class citizens, as subhuman.
Some women's lives are not as difficult as other women's. And I think some women's lives certainly can be classified in that way. Some women's lives, they may be difficult, but I wouldn't put them in the nightmare domain.
Oh man, we need change for women to wake up from this nightmare and occupy the space that we're meant to occupy. Because I tell you, if we are what we are meant to be, without fearing for our lives, for our sanity, for our existence, you can't even begin to comprehend how we can jointly change this world.
More than a nightmare. When you and I walk in the street and a woman walk in the street, they are guaranteed that they will not go at 11 or at 2 a.m. without a possibility of them being violated.
It's definitely a nightmare because you're constantly just thinking anything can happen at any given time for me.
It's mainly a nightmare, peppered with resistance. Because women are fighting and they are showing up, and they are showing up for men.
How much would you rate the way in which our society treats women?
Ndisa